Hi! Welcome to the Intro to Photoshop class. My name is JC, and I will be walking you through some of the basics on how to use Photoshop. We're going to go over, in this particular video, we're going to go over importing photos so you can get the photos actually into the document. We're going to recreate an Instagram filter so you can learn the basics of color correction. And then what we're going to do is we are going to then learn how to export photos so that you can actually use them in other programs or upload them to social media, etc. So, let's just go ahead and dive right into it. So before we start, I highly recommend putting on a music playlist of your choice. I always find it way better to edit to music. I will not have music on for your sake, so you can pause and all that stuff, but just highly recommend music. It makes everything so much better. So what we're going to do first is we're going to need to get something from you. So I will need you to take a selfie and get it into a folder on your computer. You can airdrop it. You can do whatever you need to do. We just need a picture of yourself in a folder that you can get. If you do not have access to a camera or do not feel like taking a selfie, I have one of my handsome face in there that you can use. Once you have a photo of yourself, go ahead and open up Photoshop. Click and drag that photo onto Photoshop. And this is what you're going to see when you first open it up. So Photoshop has this default layout, and I'm going to be working with this default layout, but I'm going to make a couple things just to make your life a million times easier because this is awful. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on this Learn tab because I'm learning you. So go ahead and right click that and hit close. Same thing with libraries. We're not going to use those, so you can just close those out. And now we have so much more space. It's so much better. Highly recommended doing that every time you open up Photoshop. And similarly, we can close out of some of this other stuff. But for now, don't worry about it. Here's the lay of the land. On the top row, we have our context sensitive menu. This will change based on what tools you have selected and what kind of actions you've taken. So if you are ever trying to figure out how to do something, up there is a good place to start. On the left, we have our tools. These tools are stacked top to bottom. Generally, you'll be using the ones towards the top more than the ones towards the bottom. But you'll notice that some of these tools have little arrows on the bottom right. If you click and hold there, you'll actually get more tools that are hidden underneath them. And this can be useful for things like, let's say you have the rectangular marquee tool, which is useful for selecting squares. Let's say you want a circular selection. You could click and hold and then drag your mouse over to the elliptical marquee tool and release. And now you can do a circular selection. So it's a good place to check out. It's when you have time, I recommend checking them out. But some of the more important tools we'll go over are by default available on the top level. If I do happen to point to a tool and it's not there, chances are it's hidden underneath stuff. So just click and hold, drag it to it, you're good. Another panel that you're really going to want to pay attention to is this layers panel. So this is going to be in the bottom right of your screen, and this will basically, think of this as stacks of images. You essentially have layers in Photoshop that are read from top to bottom, sort of like you're looking down on them. If, let's say, we had a layer that had a smiley face on it, that would be above our image layer. But if we were to click and drag our image layer above that smiley face, it would disappear because there's nothing. You can't see through that image. So just keep layers in mind. We're going to be using those throughout this whole thing. Layers are incredibly powerful, and I highly recommend playing with those as much as you can. Layers are a great way to work non-destructively as well, which essentially just means that you can undo stuff later, even after you close and reopen the program, and you can't undo anymore. Let's go ahead and get started with our Instagram post. So this is a picture of me, obviously. And we are going to do some basic corrections on this photo. So for starters, we're posting it to Instagram. So for starters, want to have this as cropped as a square. So what we're going to learn first is we're going to learn the crop tool, which is the most basic of all tools. If you've used any crop tool ever, you are wildly familiar with this. You can click and drag the corners to drag down if you're trying to crop down to a specific region. Maybe let's say I was just doing a headshot for a portfolio or something, and I wanted to just have my face. But we specifically want a square because we're posting this to Instagram. So on the top left, you'll see this ratio shindig. Go ahead and click and drop that down, and it'll have some very common ratios that you can select from. So you'll see things like 16:9, which is useful for TVs, 4:5, which is almost a letter size. But the one we're interested in is 1:1, which is a square. When you click on that, you'll see that you're no longer able to change how the ratio is from the length to the width. It locks it into a square, so we're able to go ahead and set this up so we can post it to Instagram. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get this all squared up. This is looking good, so go ahead and get your photo cropped in. Once you're happy with where the layout is, go ahead and hit this check mark up on the top right. Once you have done that, you will have a cropped photo. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do a really basic correction. This is something that you'll do all the time, and once you know about it, you're going to do it all the time. It's great. Go ahead and you're going to get the Spot Healing Brush tool. Now, this is the magic eraser of Photoshop. This is going to be your bread and butter for literally everything. But we don't want to do it on our current layer, which is our original photo. We want to go ahead and we want to make a copy of this so we don't destroy like any original data. If we mess something up, we want to be able to go back easily. So what you're going to do is you're going to right-click this layer, and you're going to duplicate the layer. You can name it whatever you want. Let's just call this, like, I don't know, selfie corrected. Sure. And we're going to hit OK. You'll notice that we have a second layer on here, and we can toggle these on and off to display different things. So we're going to be using our selfie corrected layer, so make sure you click on it so that it's highlighted so you know it's active. And once you have that selected, go ahead and grab your Spot Healing Brush tool. And what we're going to do is by holding, you can use the zoom tool if you'd like. You can click and drag to zoom in on different parts. It's one of the easier ways to get around if you're not familiar with Photoshop. Or if you have, if you're a shortcut kind of person, you can use Alt and scrolling up or down. So I'm holding Alt and literally just scrolling up and down to zoom in and out. Very useful to know. You'll zoom into wherever your cursor is. And so go ahead and zoom in on a blemish. So I'm going to go right here on the zit that I had on this day. It has been bothering me forever. We're going to grab our Healing Brush tool. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do some magic. So the Healing Brush tool basically is a smart fill. It will basically take pixel data from around using algorithms and artificial intelligence and magic and sorcery and wizardry, whatever. They will grab pixels from the surrounding areas and do its best guess to try to remove whatever is in this area. So go ahead, before we do anything, we're going to right click and we're going to check our settings. So whenever you're using a brush of any kind, the Spot Healing tool counts as a brush, you could right click and change something. So if your brush is too big, you can click and drag this slider to make your brush either way smaller or way bigger. I want something a little bit smaller. Then you have the hardness slider, which basically will determine how soft the edges are. So if you're wanting a very sharp edge, you can crank it all the way up. I usually keep mine around like 70 to 80. That's usually a good place to go. Ignore spacing. It doesn't really apply. And once you're done, you can just click off of it and you're good to go. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and remove this blemish. So the Spot Healing Brush tool makes this super easy. You just click and paint out the thing you don't want. Bam. Gone. Ah. Isn't that awesome? I can get rid of this mole too if I want. Bam, gone. Ah, it's amazing. And you can notice now that we've made some corrections to this layer, I can toggle on and off the changes that I've made by using this little eyeball icon next to the layer to show and hide what we've done. So, as you can see, these changes have been made to the selfie corrected layer. If you don't see any changes, you might have the wrong layer selected. So make sure when you're doing these changes, you have the right layer selected. Otherwise, you won't see anything. So that's some basic blemish removal. This tool actually works really well for a lot of different things. So this foam in the background that I have, it has this kind of weird tear in it. I could paint over this and Photoshop will get rid of that for me. It's pretty nifty. You can use it for a lot of different things. It can be used to get rid of like this cat hair that I have on me all the time. It can be used to get rid of this little speck of dust. It can be used to get rid of this particular splotch of light. I don't know. But you can use it to touch up a lot of different things on your photos, things that you might not like. This also works in crowds of people to remove specific things, which we will get to later, for a little bit more of an advanced technique. Now that we've gotten our photo cropped down, we've gotten our zits removed and all that jazz, let's go ahead and let's start working with filters. So, Photoshop has these things called adjustment layers. Let's go ahead and let's add a new adjustment layer so you can start playing with it. What you're looking for is this little like half moon icon. This is your adjustment layer. And you're going to click on that. And these are the various adjustment layers that you can have. Let's start with one of the most easiest ones. Let's go ahead and make a brightness and contrast adjustment layer. If this, for whatever reason, is below or in the wrong spot, go ahead and just drag it to the top. Easy peasy. And now you'll notice that this little properties panel comes up. If you don't see this properties panel, you can go ahead and click window and then properties. Or if you're a pro gamer, what you can do is you can double click this panel and it'll automatically bring up the properties menu. So what we're going to do is you'll notice that I have this brightness and contrast setting. It does exactly what you think it is. If you've ever used a if you've ever used like Instagram, you'll know exactly what a lot of these do. So we can do, dumb things like that or whatever, but let's go ahead and let's make it just a little bit brighter, a little bit dreamier, and let's go ahead and add a little bit of contrast to it. So there we go. That's looking okay. Maybe bring it up a little bit there. Yeah, that looks good. And if you want to see what it looks like before, remember we have this little eyeball icon. We can toggle this off and on, and we can see our changes. So we've brightened it up a little bit, and now we can see my beautiful face a little bit better. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick an Instagram filter. So if you do not know Instagram filters, you can check it out in the Instagram app, or I'm sure you can look it up online if you don't know them. So let's go ahead and let's just take a random photo of myself right now. I'm gorgeous. So what you're going to do is you're going to go and you're going to select one of these filters down here. And you're going to pick one that you like, and I recommend picking one that has a little bit of fancy stuff going. I'm going to go with the tried and true Nashville. I love Nashville. It's my favorite. It's my go-to. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to tap that, and I'm going to start analyzing what this actually looks like. So I noticed that in Nashville, if you can see that a little bit, there are sort of darker areas are a little bit more blue. You can see that everything's just a little bit more faded, a little bit dreamier, and the highlights are a bit warmer. So we're going to go ahead and do all those things. We're going to go ahead and recreate this Instagram filter using these adjustment layers. So I highly recommend playing around with these adjustment layers to figure out what they do. And that's going to be the fastest way to learn what things work and what things don't work and what things, do the things you want to do. But for now, we're going to go ahead and let's go ahead and just delete that brightness contrast layer we made. And let's go ahead and get to work recreating this Instagram filter. So first thing that I like to do is I like to, we're going to add another brightness. I know I just deleted it. Shut up. We're going to go ahead and we're going to decrease the contrast because the Nashville filter is a bit low contrast. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to bump up the brightness just a little bit. Sweet. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to do something a little bit fancy. We're going to use what's called a color balance. So color balance basically will take the highs, the brightest areas of your images, the middle-ish grayish areas of your images, and then the black darkest areas of your image, and will give you control over what hue those things show up. So, for example, we have this bright area in the back of our image, right? And let's say that was looking really warm, like the sun was out, it was super bright and warm. We can click and go to our highlights, and we can start adding bits of cyan and blue to sort of cool it down. So as you notice, as I drag the cyan over, all the bright areas of my image are getting cooler. So I can crank that up to make it really blue. You'll see that this can be used to get some really cool stylistic effects. So, in Nashville specifically, remember I said that it had bluer shadows, darker tones. So I'm going to select my shadows, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of a blue tint to it. And maybe add a little bit of cyan in there as well. And there we go. Now we have added this nice blue cool filter, but the highlights are a lot warmer in the Nashville filter. So we're going to go to our highlights, and we're going to add yellow and red to those to make those highlights even warmer. Maybe a bit more yellow. And keep in mind, this is a lot of eyeballing it. And remember, you always have an undo button. Control-Z is your friend. In Photoshop, there is, you have a bunch of undo states. And if you undo and you want to go back, it is not Control-Y like it is in some Microsoft products. It's Control-Shift-Z to continue going back. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to brighten up my, I'm going to make my highlights a bit warmer. Maybe even a little magenta in there to be spicy. Maybe a little bit of midtones. Go, yeah. Now, let's say I really want to make my shadows blue. Like, I know that my shadows need to be blue as heck. You can do what this is basically doing, this shadows, midtones, and highlights, in a more less intuitive way, but it is very powerful. You can use what's called curves. So this intimidating graph is an RGB curves graph. What this basically is showing you is it is showing you a relationship between the darkest values and the brightest values of your image. So on the x-axis, you have your input value, so everything from your darkest areas to your lightest areas. And on the y-input, you have, on the y-axis, you have your output. So what you can do is you can click and drag this marker, and you'll see that as I drag it to this bottom right one to the right, I'm making the input blacks that I have get as dark as possible because I'm basically smooshing them. You can click and drag on this curve to add different things. So let's say I add this sort of S shape. I've added contrast because I've made the darker areas darker, and I've made the brighter areas brighter. And you can do kind of a weird effect if you flip those. You get kind of this weird muted effect, which, hey, is actually kind of what we want for our Nashville effect. Honky, look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave it like this. But there's more you can do with this. Remember how we had those yellow, cyan, and red and blue controls in our color balance filter? We can sort of do the same thing with our curves, but in a more interesting way. If you click on this drop-down menu, you'll see that there is red, green, and blue channels. And if we click on those, you'll notice that the image now has you'll notice that the line has a blue color to it. Now we can click and drag on these, and you'll notice that the blue tints in our image are now becoming blue and yellow as we drag it up and down. But as you remember with our Nashville photo, we want the blues on our low ends, which is our darker areas, to be much more pronounced. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click and drag to add a sharp curve up into our blue areas to make them even more blue. And then I'm going to click and drag around the middle to sort of bring it back down into the middle. And there we go. We've created a sort of low-end blue filter, which is creating this Nashville-like effect. If I wanted to, I could go into my red values, and I could make those highlights a bit warmer by clicking and dragging on the top end to make the highlights warmer. That's a bit too warm. If you click and go back to the RGB curve, you'll see that you have your whole, you can see all the curves that you have in this. And this is really useful for fixing photos where certain types or parts of the image are incorrect. Like there are errors in the photography. So maybe a dark area was made way darker. Maybe a bright area was too bright. You can come into here and you can use these curves to sort of adjust the image. I've got mine in a pretty good spot, but if you are making a different filter or maybe you have a specific effect you're going for, you can click on this adjustment layer and play around with any of these layers. They're all incredibly useful, and you can get a lot of creative and exciting uses out of these various adjustment layers. What we're going to do now is we're going to export this image. So it's very easy to export images in Photoshop. We're just going to go File and then Export. And then you have a couple options here. But what we're going to do is we're going to use Export As. When you click on that, a little window will pop up, and you will see this sort of confusing window. We're going to change the file type. This right now is a PNG, but it's a photo, so we're going to use a JPEG since there is no transparency. We can keep that file size nice and small. I know that 1,896 pixels is going to be too big, so I'm just going to go ahead and crank that down to 1,000. Maybe that's about the size I would like it. And now what I'm going to do is all these other settings you don't need to worry about for now. Once you have all this the way that you want it, you can hit Export, and it's going to open up a file menu. And I can now save it as I would on your operating system. So if you're on Windows, I could just call this like selfie corrected, and then just hit save. And after a few seconds, Photoshop will export it. We have our final image, and that's how you recreate a Instagram filter inside of Photoshop. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope that gave you a little bit of a basic intro to Photoshop and how to use it. So in the next one, we're going to be doing a little bit more of an advanced technique when it comes to removing stuff. So stick around for that.